When we think of Jesus, we immediately picture the enlightened master who transformed the world with his message of love, compassion, and truth. But what if he wasn't alone in this mission from the start? What if, long before his birth, there was a silent lineage of guardians paving the way, protecting secrets, carrying light through generations? This is the starting point of this journey, to investigate the forgotten clues suggesting the existence of an ancient network of spiritual protectors, operating from the Exodus to the birth of Christ. The official history of religions often remains silent about what happens behind the scenes of faith. It focuses on the visible, on the institutional, but it overlooks the subtleties where the true mysteries lie. The idea that there might be secret lineages is not new. Since ancient times, the initiated have always spoken about hidden wisdoms, passed down through generations in silent rituals. The shepherds of light would be precisely these, invisible guardians, not recognized by formal power, but deeply committed to the divine mission of sustaining the light until the right time. The use of the word shepherds here is not casual. A shepherd is one who guides, protects, takes care of the flock, and in spiritual symbolism, it represents the one who watches over those who still sleep. The idea is that, throughout the centuries, there were groups and individuals who took on the role of spiritual shepherds, not only as religious guides, but as sentinels of the sacred. People who lived in the shadows, but carried an internal fire, passed down from time immemorial. By observing the biblical Exodus, the liberation of the Hebrews from Egyptian captivity, as more than a political event, but as a spiritual transition, we gain a new perspective. What if there, at that moment of escape, pilgrimage, and purification, a special lineage had emerged? A hidden group within the larger group with a distinct mission: to prepare, guard, and transmit spiritual codes that would only be revealed millennia later. This hypothesis becomes even more powerful when we look at the Exodus not only as a physical displacement, but as the beginning of a spiritual exodus, a path of awakening that would extend for generations. An invisible journey led by men and women aware of a mission that transcended their own times. They would be the first shepherds of light, those who accepted to carry a sacred flame through the deserts of history. Moses, in leading his people, was not only liberating a nation, he was also sealing a pact with the unseen, and there, by his side, would be others who understood the depth of that mission. Guardians who do not appear in traditional accounts, but whose presence can be felt in the interstices of the sacred texts. A silent initiatory lineage may very well have formed there, among the Levites, the prophets, and those most sensitive to the signs of the divine. The concept of intergenerational mission is fundamental here. It wasn't about a plan limited to one generation, but about a legacy that required centuries of spiritual cultivation. The birth of Jesus would only be the pinnacle of a long preparation. And what if there really was a spiritual network that passed through dozens of hands and hearts, crossing empires, wars, persecutions, and forgetfulness, keeping alive the flame that would one day become the living Christ? There are echoes of this mystery in various traditions. Zoroastrianism speaks of the invisible righteous ones. Mystical Judaism mentions the 36 hidden tzaddikim, who uphold the world with their purity. In ancient cultures, there are legends about wise people living in seclusion, guarding ancient wisdom. Could we be talking about the same lineages, all with different names, but with the same essence, to protect the light in times of darkness? When delving into biblical and extra-biblical accounts, we notice there are constant mentions of mysterious characters, beings that appear and disappear, who guide, who predict, who protect. Who were these figures? Angels? Ordinary men? Or perhaps the so-called shepherds of light, silently fulfilling their missions, going unnoticed because that's how it was meant to be? The birth of Jesus, therefore, may not have been an isolated event, but the blossoming of a plan architected long before. A plan woven by invisible hands, silent hearts, and watchful eyes. Shepherds who knew that moment would come and who lived their entire existence to ensure that, when he came, he would be protected, physically, spiritually, and symbolically. The initiatory faith, unlike the dogmatic faith, works with symbols, silence, and sacrifice. The shepherds of light were not seeking temples, positions, or recognition. They walked on the fringes, attentive to the right time, understanding that the invisible supports the visible. And when the time came, they were there, not to shine, but to keep the flame burning. The true mystery, therefore, is not only in Jesus, it is also in those who prepared the way for him to fulfill his mission. And these, almost always forgotten by history, may be the true spiritual heroes of humanity. The shepherds of light, those who walked before the light so that the light could shine. The desert is more than a geographical setting. It is a symbol of transformation, silence, and revelation. For the ancients, it was not just an arid place, but a space where the noise of the world disappears and the spirit awakens. The Exodus, in this context, represents not only the flight of a people, but the collective entrance into a great spiritual laboratory. Through suffering, pilgrimage, and scarcity, a higher consciousness is born. And in this fertile ground for the invisible, the first shepherds of light begin to act. For 40 years, the Israelites journeyed under the scorching sky and the silence of the dunes. The crossing was not just geographical, it was psychic. It was in this environment that God delivered the tablets of the law to Moses. But what many ignore is that parallel to the public revelation, there were secret instructions, intended only for the initiated. This distinction between revelation for the people and revelation for the guardians is essential to understand how a hidden lineage could have formed at that moment. The Levites, the tribe chosen for priestly duties, already carried a unique responsibility. But there are indications that within the Levite tribe itself, there were deeper layers, more closed groups that operated away from the collective's eyes. These could be the ancestors of the silent guardians. Their mission was not just to sacrifice, pray, or lead worship. It was to guard the mysteries, preserve the spiritual codes, and recognize the signs that would come in the following centuries. During this long journey, accounts of celestial manifestations often arise. Clouds that guided the people, columns of fire, invisible voices, apparitions. But what if not all of these manifestations were supernatural? What if part of these apparitions were human actions, staged by those who held advanced knowledge, spiritually preparing the people? The shepherds of light could have presented themselves, veiledly, as instruments of the divine, never revealing their true identities. The oral tradition of the Hebrew people is one of the richest in humanity. Many teachings were never written down, but passed on from generation to generation, in hushed voices, through tales, parables, gestures, and songs. This form of transmission preserves secrets for millennia, and it is in this that the lineage of the shepherds of light may have found their strength. To keep in silence what time would reveal at the right moment. Moses was not just a political or spiritual leader. In many esoteric traditions, he is seen as an initiate into the Egyptian mysteries, a knower of occult sciences, spiritual alchemies, and sacred geometries. And every initiate conscious of the magnitude of their mission knows they cannot work alone. They need prepared disciples, capable of continuing the plan. These disciples would then be the first to take on the role of guardians, not of temples, but of purposes. The Ark of the Covenant, regarded as a sacred object, also carries deeper symbolism than is commonly thought. It held not only the tablets of the law, but also, according to hidden traditions, energetic secrets, vibrational formulas, or even objects of spiritual power. Its custody required more than physical strength. It required internal preparation, purity, awareness. It is plausible to assume that the protection of this ark was in the hands of initiates who understood far beyond what appearances revealed. There are still curious references to different beings walking among the Hebrews. The Nephilim, for example, mentioned in Genesis, are described as giants or beings of hybrid nature. Although their role is controversial, there are theorists who suggest that such figures could symbolize distinct lineages, holders of advanced knowledge, perhaps spiritual, perhaps technological. And if some of these beings had offspring, and if among the shepherds of light there were heirs to a pre-Diluvian wisdom. After the death of Moses, Joshua takes over the leadership and guides the people to the Promised Land. This transition period is also symbolic. It is the moment when charismatic leadership becomes institutional. But in parallel, the group of spiritual guardians does not disperse. They only delve deeper into anonymity. These men and women were not seeking political power. They were trying to preserve the invisible thread of the divine mission that was still far from being fulfilled. As the centuries pass, the tribes of Israel scatter, intermingle, and evolve. But the spiritual lineages, these continue in secret. Some of the shepherds of light retreat to deserts, others to mountains. Some establish small communities of wisdom far from the tumult of cities. They are like hidden oases amidst the chaos of history. Within them, knowledge continues to be transmitted, now with even more discretion, because the time of fulfillment has not yet come. In Jewish mystical traditions, there is great respect for what is called the Watcher, or the one who watches unseen. These figures are described as wise ones who do not directly interfere, but who observe, discreetly guide, and spiritually protect the decisive movements of humanity. This archetype aligns perfectly with the role of the light shepherds. They are the timekeepers, attentive to the divine rhythm, ready to act when necessary. This second part of our journey ends with a premonition. Nothing was random. The desert not only shaped a people, but also forged an invisible lineage, prepared to support the birth of a new era. Those who awakened in the silence of the dunes would continue to awaken others, generation after generation, until the right moment. And when that moment arrived, their light would reveal itself like never before. The official history often neglects the silent ones, those who did not found empires, who did not wield swords, who did not make speeches in public squares. But it is precisely these people who shape the invisible. The Essenes were like this, discreet, almost invisible to the Roman world and to the institutional Judaism of the time. But their steps echoed in the corridors of the Spirit, and perhaps among them were some of the oldest representatives of the lineage of the shepherds of light. The accounts about the Essenes have reached us in a fragmented way, through historians like Flavius Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder. They describe them as a community of ascetic monks, living away from cities, dedicated to purity, the study of scriptures, and a life of extreme discipline. But behind this appearance of simplicity, there was something deeper. An initiatory structure, almost esoteric, supported by symbols, codes, and oaths. The most well-known community of the Essenes inhabited Qumran, on the shores of the Dead Sea. It was a dry, isolated, almost inhospitable place, the ideal setting for spiritual initiation. They believed that only through isolation and total purification could one prepare for the advent of a new era. And among their many rituals, daily baths, extended fasts, and silent contemplation stood out. It wasn't about aesthetic practice or spiritual eccentricity, but rigorous training to support an invisible mission. Among them was the figure of the Master of Justice, a prophetic character who guided the community, and who, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, would be the precursor of a new era. Some scholars suggest that this master was not a person, but a role passed down through the generations, similar to the Eastern concept of a reincarnated Lama. It's possible that this figure represented the link in the lineage of the shepherds of light within the Essenes, a sacred position, always held by an initiate prepared to guard and transmit knowledge. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 brought to light ancient texts, many of which had never been seen outside the Essene circle. Fragments of the Torah, prophetic commentaries, rules of conduct, and mystical texts were hidden in clay urns, as if waiting for the right time to emerge. It's as if the lineage itself had buried its secrets there, in spiritual capsules destined for the future. This gesture in itself already reveals the awareness of a transgenerational mission, a trademark of the Shepherds of Light. Silence was the main language among the Essenes, a silence that did not signify absence, but elevated presence. They spoke little because they knew how to listen to what was not said. They knew how to read the signs of nature, interpret dreams, recognize subtle vibrations. Silence allowed them to resonate with higher realms, and even more, it protected them. In a time of persecution and control, silence was the perfect shield for the guardians of hidden truth. There are strong indications that John the Baptist, the great announcer of Christ, may have lived among the Essenes. His life in the desert, his practice of baptism with water, his clothing, and his rigorous way of life are compatible with the Essene customs. John was a crucial figure, the link between the Old and New Testament, and he may well have been the last formal link in this lineage before the public emergence of Jesus, a genuine shepherd of light who prepared the ground for the light to manifest. The connection between Jesus and the Essenes is one of the most debated by scholars of profound spirituality. Although the New Testament does not directly mention this link, there are striking similarities between the teachings of Jesus and Essene values. Love for one's neighbor, detachment from material things, communal living, rejection of power worship, healing practices, and radical compassion. It's as if Jesus had absorbed, transformed, and expanded the essence of what the Essenes cultivated in secret. The structure of the Essenes is also impressive. They lived in complete communion, sharing goods, conducting ritualistic meals in silence, and practicing daily meditations at sunrise and sunset. This spiritual organization was rigorously maintained by a council of elders. And among these were the wisest, the initiates who knew the spiritual maps, the star alignments, the soul codes, guardians of truth who sought not recognition, but efficacy. There is also a fascinating hypothesis that the Essenes were part of an international wisdom network. They maintained contacts with other silent orders from Persia, India, and Egypt. This would explain the similarity between their teachings and those of other ancient traditions, such as Vedanta, Zoroastrianism, and Hermeticism. We would be facing a group with a planetary vision, aware of a cosmic mission that went beyond their time. The most important thing, however, is not just what the Essenes did, but what they prepared. They didn't emerge to found a new religion, but to hold a spiritual space until the next stage was ready. The coming of Jesus was not therefore a bolt from the blue. It was the fruit of centuries of quiet cultivation, of invisible preparation, of absolute fidelity to a greater cause. And the Essenes, more than any other group, carried this preparation with solemnity. We conclude this section with a crucial reflection. How many of us today would be willing to live in absolute anonymity for a mission that would only reveal itself centuries later? The Essenes were. They are the testament that the sacred does not need stages, spotlights, or crowns. Deep conviction in serving the light is enough. And if the shepherds of light existed, among them, the Essenes were their most loyal ambassadors. Long before the manger in Bethlehem was illuminated by human eyes, the heavens had already spoken, and it wasn't in a common language. It was in stars, in cosmic alignments, in celestial maps that only the wise could decipher. The Star of Bethlehem is, perhaps, the most emblematic sign of a birth awaited not only by earthly prophets, but by observers of the firmament. And here we enter the territory of the Sky Watchers, men and ancient orders who, for centuries, contemplated the stars waiting for the promised Messiah. There is much debate about what the Star of Bethlehem truly was. Could it have been a comet? A planetary alignment? A miracle visible only to the initiated? Modern astronomers suggest that around 7 BC, there was a conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, a rare celestial phenomenon which, to the astrologers of the time, represented the birth of a great king. But more important than the physical nature of the star is the symbolism it carries, the light that guides the wise to the birth of the incarnate light. The wise men who follow this star were not kings in the political sense. They were magi in the ancient sense, masters of celestial knowledge, priests of ancestral traditions, knowledgeable about the movement of the heavens and the human soul. Probably coming from Persia, perhaps members of Zoroastrian or Chaldean orders, these men represent the oldest in humanity's spiritual search, and their journey to Bethlehem is a profound rite, the knowledge of the East revering the rising light of the West. The word mage, now distorted, has noble roots. It was a title given to the priestly caste of Persia, the Magi, whose role was to watch the skies, guard the knowledge of the stars, and interpret divine signs. They knew that each astrological cycle carried profound spiritual meanings. They did not predict the future like charlatans, but read the cosmic rhythms as one who deciphers the breath of the Creator. And it was in this celestial flow that they recognized the exact moment when an avatar would descend to Earth. The journey of the Magi is also an initiatory metaphor. They cross deserts, face ambiguous kings like Herod, and refuse to return the same way. These are spiritual tests, stages of the seeker's path, archetypes of the awakening journey. And each of their movements is watched perhaps by other closer watchers, the shepherds of light who inhabited the very land of Israel, ready to recognize and protect the child from his arrival. According to some occult traditions, the Magi did not come alone. They traveled with entourages, protectors, scribes, and disciples. This entourage, upon entering Jerusalem, caused commotion and unrest in Herod's palace. The birth of a king, predicted by the stars, threatened the established power. And it is here that the sky watchers reveal another aspect. They were not just scholars, they were guardians. They knew that the arrival of the light would also bring the fury of the darkness, and they were prepared to protect it. It's possible that these magi already knew the approximate location of the birth in advance. They followed star maps, yes, but also ancient prophecies, texts preserved from Babylon, visions of the prophets Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel. The prophecies spoke of a time, a lineage, a sign. And the celestial shepherds reading these codes understood that the birth of Jesus would be the most anticipated event since the beginning of creation. But what's striking is that the Magi did not stay. They delivered their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and left. They did not assume religious roles. They did not found churches. They did not demand honors. This suggests that their mission was quiet, precise, delimited, to acknowledge the incarnation of light, ensure its sacred reception, and disappear. Just as the shepherds of light would do, spring into action at the right time, and then retreat to the shadows, where the mission continues far from the world's eyes. And there are also the shepherds of the field, mentioned in the Gospels. Simple men, but who received an angelic visit announcing the birth. Why them? Why not the temple priests? Because the shepherds symbolize the guardians of the collective soul. They are humble figures, but spiritually sensitive, accustomed to the silence of the night, to attentive listening. They, in their simplicity, mirror the shepherds of light, alert, discreet, ready to act with reverence. Among scholars of ancient traditions, there are those who believe that there were spiritual groups who called themselves the Watchers, and their role was literally to monitor the birth and death of great avatars. These groups maintained celestial observatories, cross-referenced astronomical data with ancient prophecies, and identified entry and exit points for great souls. Jesus would be one of these cosmic intersections, and the Watchers were present to certify his arrival. The Zoroastrian tradition to which the Magi likely belonged spoke of the cyclical birth of saviors known as Saoshyant, enlightened beings who would come to restore order and combat darkness. These priests had been waiting for centuries for this birth, and upon recognizing Jesus, they understood that the time had come. But they also knew that their mission was not to turn him into a symbol, but to ensure his safe arrival. This spiritual care was shared with other watchmen. From a distance, Essene communities were likely already on alert. Initiated women, like Mary and Elizabeth, had long felt the call. The invisible network of light shepherds, scattered among the mountains, deserts, and villages, was not caught off guard. On the contrary, that moment was the climax of centuries of silent preparation, and they knew that the newly born light would need watchful eyes, not just celestial, but human. The Star of Bethlehem, therefore, was not just a sign for the Magi. It was the cosmic bell's toll for all the guardians of the earth, a vibrational alert that echoed in the hearts of those who, even unknowingly, belonged to the lineage of the shepherds of light. Every star, every symbol, every step was coordinated with divine precision. And between the heavens and the earth, a sacred alliance was formed. The birth of light would be watched and protected. There is a profound silence between the accounts of Jesus' birth and the beginning of his public ministry. Between the age of 12, when he was found debating with scholars in the temple, and 30, when he was baptized by John the Baptist, what happened? The Bible reveals nothing. But emptiness is not absence. Many mystical traditions suggest that these 18 years of silence were, in fact, the most intense and sacred years of his spiritual formation. Years carefully protected, not by chance, but by an ancestral network of guardians, the invisible protectors. It's not just romantic speculation. Apocryphal documents, Eastern esoteric traditions, and legends preserved by mystics suggest that Jesus traveled. And he traveled extensively. Egypt, India, Tibet, Persia, lands where ancient knowledge was safeguarded by initiates for millennia. In each of these regions, he would have received specific teachings, not as a common student, but as one who already carried within him the seed of Christ in the process of full awakening. But it's crucial to ask, who took him? Who ensured his protection and movement in such distant and hostile territories? These journeys demanded resources, safe paths, and contact networks. None of this would be possible without the support of a silent and extremely dedicated circle. The lineage of the light shepherds, who had been watching since the Exodus, now took on the most delicate mission: to accompany and protect the Son of Light during his formative phase. They were monks, merchants, astrologers, therapists, and anonymous. They were everywhere and nowhere. In Egypt, where the Atlantean memory still pulsed in the corridors of the temples, Jesus would have come into contact with priests who were heirs to the ancient mysteries. There, he would have studied spiritual alchemy, sacred geometry, and the secrets of symbolic resurrection, a legacy of Isis and Osiris. But no Egyptian temple opened without a recommendation. The initiates of the hidden lineage opened the doors and accompanied him. These men and women, trained to act in the shadows, were at his side, unnoticed, but attentive to every step. In India, it is said that Jesus was familiar with the Vedas and learned to meditate with yogis from the mountains. Accounts preserved in the Hemis monastery in the Himalayas mention a young man named Isa, coming from the West, who taught with compassion and wisdom. This young man spoke of unity, of love, of an inner kingdom. It's hard to ignore the coincidences, but it's even more impressive to imagine the guardians who accompanied him on this crossing of cultures, languages, and traditions. They were polyglots of the spirit, capable of integrating without belonging, serving as living bridges between worlds. Also in Tibet, among the Buddhist monks, there are echoes of a wise foreigner who would have conversed with the lamas. The records are vague, but the symbolism is clear. The forming Christ was where knowledge was purest and the vibration highest. The invisible protectors here may have manifested themselves as disguised masters, as elders or travel companions, ensuring that nothing would divert the purpose of the young avatar. But it wasn't just about overseas trips. There were also internal retreats, long periods of contemplation, absolute silence, and intense purification. During these phases, the guardians acted more as energetic anchors than physical companions. They knew when to step back, when to silently support, and when to disappear. This strategic wisdom is a hallmark of the ancestral lineage, not to intervene out of vanity, but only to keep the path safe and intact. The role of Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, also needs to be reassessed under this light. He was not just a carpenter, he was a member of a Davidic lineage, heir to a spiritual royal blood, and perhaps guardian of the Son's mission. Discreet, obedient, and firm, he represents the archetype of the silent protector. His role was vital in childhood, and even after his disappearance from the texts, his protective spirit may have remained active in the network that supported Jesus' journey. Maria, in turn, is much more than just a biological mother. She is the incarnated cosmic mother, a highly advanced initiate, trained to conceive, gestate, and sustain the incarnation of divine light. Her education, often overlooked, likely took place among Essene communities or spiritual female lineages. She not only understood what her son was, she was part of the plan of his mission. Guardian of the mysteries of the sacred feminine, Maria represents the compassionate and intuitive face of the protective lineage. Among the Essenes, the concept of the 7 silences circulated, initiatory phases where the initiate should master 7 levels of silence: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, vibrational, causal, and cosmic. Jesus, in his hidden years, went through these stages, and the guardians were there to ensure the space, time, and purity necessary for each step. They were like invisible monks, supporting the temple where the inner Christ was born. During these years, Jesus was not only receiving, he was also healing, teaching, impacting. Small villages would have witnessed his first miracles, still discreet, such as healing touches, words of wisdom, spontaneous blessings. But every gesture was carefully monitored by the protectors. They knew that the time of silence had not yet ended. They prevented the young man from being confused with political prophets or premature messianic figures. The light needed to mature before it could shine. These guardians also acted against invisible threats, spiritual influences that sought to mislead, lower astral entities that attempted to intervene, and even political forces that could have identified Jesus' potential as a threat to the status quo. This protective network was more than physical, it was vibrational. Like a bubble of light maintained by collective intention, it isolated the nascent Christ so that his mission could emerge intact. Finally, Jesus' return to Galilee was not by chance. It was the exact point where preparation ended and public mission began. He reappeared before the people not as the carpenter's son, but as a full-fledged master, ready to turn the world upside down. And there, in the silence of the backstage, the invisible protectors watch. Some step away, others remain, but all know the light has been lit, and history will never be the same. When Jesus begins his public ministry, he does it not in a triumphant manner, but simple and direct. He preaches in villages, converses with fishermen, heals the sick, speaks in parables. But behind this apparent simplicity, each gesture, each word, and each movement follow a plan of the highest spiritual precision. And while the crowds were enchanted, behind the scenes a silent network of guardians moved. The shepherds of light, now more attentive than ever, knew that the final time was approaching, and that the light of the world would pass through the darkest night. As Jesus approaches Jerusalem, the discomfort among the powerful grows. He does not confront the Roman Empire directly, but he shakes its spiritual foundations by returning to the people a sense of inner power, by undoing the mediation of the temples. This makes him dangerous, not only to Caesar, but to the religious leaders of the time. The invisible protectors knew that the clash would be inevitable, and their mission now was twofold: to preserve the integrity of Christ until the end, and to ensure that the journey of the cross was fulfilled according to the higher plan. The Last Supper, in its symbolic depth, is the convergence point of all previous initiatic traditions. It was not just a meal, it was a ritual, a moment when the Master gathers the 12 archetypes of cosmic forces and performs the vibrational transfer of what was to come. Each gesture, the breaking of the bread, the shared chalice, everything was loaded with codes, and at that moment, the guardians were present. Perhaps not at the table, but nearby, keeping the energetic field of the event aligned with the higher spheres. Judas, often pointed out as the villain, takes on an extremely complex role. Some Gnostic traditions claim that he was, in fact, the most faithful disciple, the only one brave enough to fulfill the most difficult role, that of triggering fate. This does not redeem his act, but it puts it under another light. What if Judas was instructed by a guardian? What if he knew that by handing over Christ, he was initiating the process of the great revelation? The shepherds of light, who understood the whole, could well have supported this moment with awareness and pain. During the trial, the humiliations and the floggings, it seems that Jesus is alone, but he is not. Around him, among the crowd and the soldiers, are the watchful eyes of the guardians. They know they cannot interfere. The cross needs to be raised. But they act in another way, blocking attempts at anticipation, preventing the suffering from exceeding the necessary threshold, and keeping Christ's vibration aligned with the source. It's an invisible protection, but powerful, as if every physical blow was softened by a vibrational shield sustained by them. The figure of Mary Magdalene emerges strongly at this point. More than a disciple, she represents the feminine principle of spiritual support. Guardian of Christ's soul, her role goes beyond what the texts tell. Many scholars point out that she had deep knowledge of the mysteries, being initiated in Egyptian and Essene schools. During Jesus' passion, she acts as an anchor for the Christ energy, as a receptacle for transformed suffering. And around her, silent women and men, belonging to the lineage of the shepherds of light, position themselves to hold the field. The path to Golgotha, known as Via Dolorosa, also holds symbolic value. Each fall, each step, each glance carries encoded spiritual messages. The cross, far from being just a torture instrument, is also a symbol. It represents the intersection between heaven and earth, between the divine vertical and the human horizontal. The guardians knew this. They did not try to stop the Calvary. They supported it, just like holding a candle's flame in the middle of a hurricane. In the crucifixion, when the sky darkens and the earth shakes, the material world seems to crumble. But for the initiated, that moment is the opening of a portal. Jesus, in giving his life, opens a vertical axis of reconnection between humanity and the source. He consciously goes through pain, abandonment, death, not as a victim, but as a transmutator. And the shepherds of light, who have prepared this for millennia, watch in silence, with absolute reverence. Some present physically, others only in deep prayer, in states of meditation that transcend space-time. The body of Jesus, once surrendered, becomes the focal point of disputes. The empire wanted to expose it. The priests feared its worship, but the guardians were already in action. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, but also a man of deep faith, assumes the role of final protector. He negotiates, transports, and prepares the body urgently, perhaps following instructions from the protective network itself. The tomb at that moment becomes not a grave, but a womb, the place where Christ would return not as a man, but as an eternal presence. During the 3 days in the tomb, much is speculated. Gnostic, Kabbalistic, and initiatory theories suggest that Jesus descended to the lower worlds to liberate trapped souls, adjust frequencies, and restore lost paths, a spiritual work of cosmic proportions. In this interval, the shepherds of light intensify their action. They perform rituals of energetic sustenance, protect the tomb from interventions, and maintain the vibration around the body for the return. They are not just spectators, they are co-creators of the miracle. The resurrection, then, is not just biological. It is the victory of the spirit over matter. Jesus returns, but he is no longer the same. His presence vibrates at a different frequency. He appears and disappears. He speaks little. He instructs with a glance. He touches without touching. He is beyond time and flesh. And the guardians, now aware that the greater plan has been fulfilled, prepare for their next function: to protect the legacy, to spread the seed, to keep the flame alive in human hearts. Some vanish, others take on new missions. The cycle comes to a close, but the journey continues. The cross was not the end, it was the gate, and those who guarded the light during its traverse through the darkness now guide it towards new worlds. The shepherds of light, as always, did not expect recognition. Only the silence of a mission accomplished, and a promise. Whenever the light threatens to extinguish, they will return. The resurrection of Jesus was not the end of the narrative, but rather the birth of a new cycle of consciousness. Emerging from the tomb, Christ was no longer just a man, but a living presence among worlds. He appeared in unexpected places, spoke in enigmatic ways, touched without being touched, and for 40 days he manifested himself to selected disciples, delivering instructions that were never fully revealed. This period of appearances was the beginning of the most hidden mission of all: the dispersion of light through the silent ones. The canonical Gospels describe few of these appearances, but the apocryphal and Gnostic texts reveal more. Jesus would have taught secrets of the kingdom that could not be understood by the masses. There were truths that were not transmitted with words, but with vibration, with presence. These instructions were entrusted to the most prepared disciples, and among them, to those who were already part of the lineage of the guardians. The shepherds of light, who accompanied Jesus since before his birth, now received the task of spreading spiritual seeds in fertile and invisible soil. One of the most central figures in this new phase was Mary Magdalene. According to Gnostic texts such as the Gospel of Mary and the Pistis Sophia, she received direct teachings from the resurrected Christ. Jesus would have instructed her about the mysteries of the Spirit, about the ascension of the soul, and about the structure of the invisible cosmos. Mary thus becomes the bearer of gnosis, direct divine knowledge. And alongside her, other initiates began the silent mission: to guard, protect, and plant the kingdom of God in the hearts of few, but awakened. It is said that Mary Magdalene set off towards the south of Gaul, now known as the south of France. There she settled in silence, in a cave known today as Saint-Baume, where she remained for years in prayer and meditation. But what few people know is that she was not alone. Small groups of disciples accompanied her, forming hidden wisdom cores among the valleys and mountains of Europe. These were the shepherds of light of the new era, who carried with them not a book, but a vibrational field, a silent legacy transmitted from soul to soul. In other regions, disciples followed different paths. Thomas, for instance, is said to have reached India, where he founded secret communities that preserved profound teachings, far beyond what the formal doctrine would later establish. Paul, the convert in Damascus, despite not having directly interacted with the historical Jesus, received his mission in a direct way, through a mystical experience. But what is almost never mentioned, Paul is also believed to have been guided by hidden guardians who prepared his path. Nothing in this plane occurs without the watchers of the light. Many of the so-called primitive churches that emerged after the Ascension were not visible temples, but networks of conscious beings, interconnected by vibration, intention, and silence. They gathered in houses, caves, or fields. There, power or hierarchy was not discussed, but the practice of presence. The sharing of bread was, above all, a ritual of mutual recognition among the awakened. These communities formed the subtle web that would support the true Christianity for centuries, not the one imposed by empires, but the one that flourished where love was lived in secret. The Order of Melchizedek, briefly mentioned in the scriptures, begins to appear more clearly in the accounts of the initiates. It is a timeless spiritual lineage, without human origin, without institutional priesthood, based solely on consciousness. Jesus is described as the high priest of this order. But after his physical departure, it is up to others to sustain this frequency. The shepherds of light, heirs of this lineage, assume the function of continuing the mission, now without the need for a physical temple. They become living temples. In the apocryphal Gospels, there are mentions of secret meetings, moments when the resurrected Christ appears to small groups, revealing spiritual maps, guidance on future cycles, and even predictions about the following centuries. The language used in these meetings was not linear. It was symbolic, alchemical, often in multidimensional parables. Those who were there understood not with the mind, but with the being. These teachings were not lost. They were simply buried within consciousnesses that knew the right time to bring them forth. Over time, the guardians dispersed. Some returned to simple lives, living as farmers, healers, travelers, anonymous wise men. Others maintained cores in hidden monasteries, communities among mountains, where teaching was passed on through gestures and silences. The lineage did not die out. It just dove even deeper into anonymity. They knew that the official history would follow another course, but the true mission continued in secret. Curiously, many of the esoteric orders that would arise centuries later, such as the Templars, Rosicrucians, and certain branches of Freemasonry, claim a connection to these secret teachings. Some scholars suggest that documents preserved by these orders hold fragments of the original knowledge, transmitted in code to escape persecution. The shepherds of light in these contexts may have taken on new forms, adapting to each era, but always maintaining the same goal: to uphold the Christic presence in the world until humanity was ready to fully receive it. And most impressively, this mission has never been interrupted. Even in the darkest times of history, there has always been an invisible thread holding up the light. During the Inquisition, the exiles, the wars, the epidemics, in all human suffering, there was always an awakened heart, a silent soul, a shepherd of light who, even in tears, kept the vibration active. The network remained intact because its foundation was not physical, but spiritual. Now, thousands of years later, this mission begins to reveal itself again. Many feel the call, even without knowing where it comes from. There are dreams, visions, intuitions, unexplainable desires to seek the sacred. These are the echoes of the lineage, awakening in the collective consciousness. The shepherds of light are not an institution. They are a frequency, a vibration that traverses the centuries, igniting souls prepared for the silent mission of unconditional love. If there is a constant in the movement of the shepherds of light, it is their ability to adapt without losing themselves, to act without being noticed, and to profoundly influence without claiming merit. After the events of the resurrection and the scattering of the disciples, this silent lineage dove even deeper into historical anonymity. However, their vibrational thread remained active, crossing empires, revolutions, persecutions, and reappearing, in a veiled manner, at crucial moments in human history. During the first centuries of Christianity, while the institutional church was consolidating around rigid and powerful structures, underground communities kept alive the spiritual essence of Jesus' original teaching. These communities, known by many names, such as Ebionites, Therapeutae, Gnostics, or Nazarenes, did not seek to compete with ecclesiastical power. On the contrary, they protected the heart of the teaching in silence, in the simplicity of gestures, in lived love, in the silent contemplation of the inner light. As the institutionalization of faith gained momentum, the persecution of heretics intensified. Many of those who carried the thread of lineage were hunted, burned, expelled, or forced into silence. But like in the times of the Exodus, the desert always welcomed those who needed to disappear to preserve the sacred. Secret monasteries, hidden villages, mystery schools in the forests of Europe. Each space became a point of light that kept alive the original vibration of the non-institutional Christ. The Middle Ages, often depicted as dark, was also the stage for significant spiritual awakenings. In the figure of the Templars, for instance, there is much more than religious warriors. Hidden records point to an initiatory order with deep ties to the secret teachings of the Middle East, especially those transmitted by communities descended from the Essenes and Gnostics. Some suggest that the Templars received manuscripts and spiritual instructions directly from the lineage of the Shepherds of Light, which they protected and codified over 2 centuries. With the fall of the Templars in the 14th century, part of this knowledge was transferred to other groups, such as the Rosicrucians, who emerged in the early 17th century with a symbolic and deeply initiatory language. Their manifestos speak of an invisible brotherhood, composed of wise men and women, without a homeland, without a fixed temple, who work for the good of humanity. Anyone who reads carefully notices there the echo of the silent mission of the Shepherds of Light, to work behind the scenes to prepare collective consciousness for a new era. We cannot ignore also the influence of this lineage in science and art. Many of the greatest geniuses in history were touched by this invisible frequency. Leonardo da Vinci, with his multidimensional mind and hidden symbolism in works like The Last Supper, seems to have had access to truths not recorded in books. Isaac Newton, in addition to being a physicist and mathematician, was a profound scholar of alchemy and biblical prophecies. Carl Jung, with his archetypal psychology and his fascination with gnosis, clearly stated, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves," a deeply aligned idea with the teachings of the ancient guardians. These men and women were not necessarily formal members of initiatory orders. However, they carried within them the frequency that connected them to the ancestral lineage. They received inspiration, visions, intuitions that sprung from invisible sources. The lineage of the Shepherds of Light operates in this way, not by adherence to institutions, but by vibrational alignment to the purpose. When someone truly awakens to the mission of the Spirit, they automatically become a link in this network, even if they never hear this name. Throughout the centuries, this lineage has camouflaged itself in the most diverse forms. Poets, doctors, architects, mystics, astronomers, monks, midwives, pilgrims, wanderers, healers, and anonymous teachers. They did not care about being remembered. Their only concern was to fulfill their role. They were present in major discoveries, in inexplicable healings, in shifts of consciousness, in moments when a desperate soul found meaning, even if they did not know where the help came from. The 20th century, with its technological acceleration and expansion of consciousness, also witnessed the intense activity of this lineage. Movements of self-awareness, vibrational therapies, spiritual channeling, and an unprecedented openness to topics previously restricted to occultism emerged. But again, among the true seekers, those who do not let themselves be corrupted by vanity, the presence of the Shepherds of Light was noticeable in the silent guidance, in the synchronous encounters, in the inner revelations. And now, at the start of the 21st century, the frequency of the Shepherds of Light begins to emerge more clearly, not as a new religion or secret order, but as an inner calling that thousands of people are starting to feel. They are ordinary people, therapists, teachers, parents, artists, engineers, farmers, who begin to remember something they never learned, but recognize as true. They begin to act with more compassion, to feel more purpose, to desire to serve life. This is the echo of the lineage vibrating in their cells. It's important to understand, the Shepherds of Light are not bound by time, geography, or doctrine. They are timeless. They are all those who, driven by unconditional love, choose to uphold the light even when everything seems dark. They are the ones who pray in silence, the ones who listen without judgment, the ones who see the soul behind the ego. They are those who, even unknowingly, have been prepared for lifetimes for this moment on the planet. Now, more than ever, the world needs the vibration of this lineage. The visible chaos is merely the crumbling of the old. Behind the apparent collapse, a new humanity is being born, and the shepherds of light are here to anchor this transition. Not with fiery speeches, but with silent actions, conscious presence, and love that gives without measure. And if you feel this calling, if you notice that there is something in you that resonates with these words, don't doubt it. You are not alone. The lineage lives in every awakened being who chooses truth, love, and service. This mission is not for the few. It's for everyone who, when looking within, finds the spark of the living Christ, waiting to act. What began in the desert, in silence, with a few initiates hiding the light beneath cloaks of humility and anonymity, now enters a new cycle, a time when souls carrying the same vibrational seal finally begin to recognize each other. This reunion does not occur in temples or cathedrals. It happens in hearts, in the silent glances of people who have never met, but recognize each other in an instant. The field of lineage is activating, and the shepherds of light are awakening to a collective and contemporary mission. Throughout the centuries, this lineage has never ceased to act. But their work has always been punctual, strategic, veiled. Now, however, the planet's vibration has changed. Human consciousness is crossing a threshold, a point of no return between the illusion of separation and the reconnection with unity. That's why many, in recent years, have begun to feel an unexplainable calling, an inner urge to serve, heal, meditate, teach, give, silence, transform. This urge is the touch of the lineage. The shepherds of light are incarnated everywhere. They are psychologists who welcome with the soul, doctors who look beyond the body, musicians who play healing frequencies, leaders who serve and do not serve themselves. They are in the villages, in the big cities, in the fields, in the monasteries, and also in the offices. They are where they need to be. They do not wear badges. They do not have titles. But wherever they go, the frequency changes. The vibration rises. The light becomes present. And this silent presence is the greatest sign that the lineage is alive. This process of gathering is subtle, but powerful. People begin to meet through synchronicity. Groups are formed without prior planning. Dreams reveal missions. Ordinary lives are intersected by events that lead to awakening. And in each encounter, no matter how simple it may seem, there is a code being activated. The spiritual memory, which has been dormant for millennia, begins to pulsate. It's as if, from the inside out, souls remember that they were trained for this time. The new Exodus is not a geographical escape. It is an inner crossing, a definitive departure from the structures of fear, control, scarcity, and separation. Just as the Hebrew people left Egypt for the Promised Land, humanity now leaves mental and emotional prisons towards full consciousness. But this crossing needs guides. It needs spiritual shepherds, not dominators, but conscious, humble, loving servants. This is where the lineage reveals its maturity. It is ready to guide, not to control. The prophecies have always foretold a time like this. The book of Isaiah speaks of a path being prepared in the wilderness. The Revelation of John describes a woman clothed in sun, crowned with stars. The Mayan, Hindu, Buddhist, shamanic, and Sufi traditions all converge in predicting a time of collapse, followed by rebirth. And the shepherds of light have always known that they would be part of this transition, not as visible protagonists, but as invisible pillars of the new consciousness. Now this consciousness begins to emerge en masse. Children are born with instinctive wisdom. Young people refuse to follow empty standards. Adults, exhausted from competition, seek meaning. The elderly awaken dormant gifts. The entire planet pulses like a cosmic womb, preparing to give birth to a new humanity. And the guardians, who once watched over the incarnation of Christ, now watch over the incarnation of the collective Christ, the awakening of light in everyone. The lineage of the light shepherds will not come from religions, though it may touch them. It will not be named by governments, nor recognized by academies. It arises where there is true love, where there is fertile silence, where there is active compassion. And unlike the past, it will no longer be necessary to hide. The time has come to serve the light with firmness and loving visibility, not to exalt oneself, but to inspire. Each person who feels this calling is a link in the chain. And the gathering of the lineage does not mean the creation of a new external order, but the strengthening of a unified field of consciousness. A field that communicates through vibration, through pure intention, through spiritual synchronicity. When two or more gather in the name of true love, the lineage manifests. When a soul chooses to forgive, to embrace, to trust, to create, the lineage is renewed, and the new exodus is strengthened. It is a time of return, but not to the past. We return to the origin, to the purpose, to the point where the human and the divine reconcile. Spirituality ceases to be an effort and becomes breath. Everyday life becomes a ritual. The relationship with others becomes a portal. And in this field of restored consciousness, the shepherds of light take their natural place, sustainers of the invisible that transforms the visible. What was once a thread is now a web. What was once a whisper is now a song. What was once a secret is now a service. And you who listen, who read, who feel, perhaps you have always been a part. Maybe you have wandered in the desert, touched the tunic, supported Christ with silent prayers. Maybe you were one of the eyes that watched the sky in Bethlehem, or one of the hands that prepared the anointing in the tomb. And now, once again, you are here. The lineage has gathered. The journey begins anew. Mind unfettered, now it's up to you. If at any point in this journey you felt a shiver, an inexplicable memory, a subtle certainty that you've walked these paths before, then perhaps you are part of the lineage of the shepherds of light. Comment below. Do you feel like you were already carrying this mission even before hearing about it? Share your intuition, your vision, or simply write, "I am part of the journey." When you comment, you anchor this truth in the collective field and activate other hearts that, like yours, are ready to remember. Let's make this comment section a meeting point for the lineage, a living manifestation of the silent light that now reveals itself. Comment bravely, because each word that springs from your heart also awakens another's heart. And if this video moved you, get ready. On your screen now is the next chapter of this revelation. The Brotherhood of Light, the secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased. In it, we will unravel the sacred knowledge that was hidden from humanity, the internal code that Jesus silently transmitted, and that is now beginning to awaken in you. Click now and continue your awakening. You are not alone. You are mind unfettered, and the light you carry is just beginning to shine.